Through the thick hum of the city, where ambition elbowed despair on every corner, walked Mark. He didn't walk like a man late for a meeting or heading home to a warm dinner. No, his walk was slower, more methodical, the kind of pace adopted by those who no longer needed to be anywhere in particular. Mark was homeless, not chronically, not pathologically, just circumstantially. A few years ago, he was like anyone else, a machinist at a manufacturing plant, living in a modest apartment, going out for beers on Fridays, occasionally indulging the idea of saving for a vacation. Then came the layoffs. The plant downsized, the benefits dried up, and before he knew it, the rent notices turned red. He didn't spiral, nothing so dramatic. He simply declined, gently, like a leaf in late October, fluttering down without protest. He never begged. Pride still flickered somewhere in his ribcage, like the last coal in a dying hearth. Mark scavenged for recyclables, did odd jobs when they came, mostly unloading delivery trucks before dawn, under the table, under the radar. He slept in an abandoned warehouse near the railway line, sharing the space with rats and occasionally other men like him. Not dangerous men, just invisible ones. But even in the midst of his reduced circumstances, Mark clung to a few habits of civility. He washed in the public restroom at the train station. He kept a comb in his pocket. And every morning, he walked to the same park bench near the river, where he sat with his coffee, when he could afford it, and observed the parade of normal life going by. It was on one of these mornings that she appeared. She didn't look like a billionaire. In fact, she didn't look like she belonged to the world at all. She was barefoot, her dress slightly torn, and her hair, a tangle of red and gray, whipped around her face like ivy in a storm. She was talking to herself, or to the pigeons, or maybe to some audience only she could see. She looked hungry. Mark wasn't sure what made him do it. Maybe it was the way she sat on the opposite end of the bench, ignoring him completely, as if she didn't register that he, too, was someone people typically ignored. Or maybe it was the tired tilt of her head, so similar to his own reflection in the puddles. But he reached into his coat, pulled out the only thing he had left, a half-wrapped sandwich from the night before. It wasn't fresh. It wasn't even particularly edible, but it was food. Without a word, he offered it to her. She looked at it, then at him, then back at the sandwich. "You're giving me your last bite?" she asked, voice hoarse. "Looks like it," he replied. She took it, bit into it slowly, as if weighing its worth. When she finished, she said nothing, just nodded once, stood, and walked away barefoot over the frosted grass. Mark didn't think much of it. Life on the street was full of strange encounters. People came and went, like clouds. He assumed she was another one of those drifting souls, someone who had been rich once, maybe, and had cracked under the weight of it all. But she wasn't. Her name was Evelyn Hartwell, founder of Hartwell Ventures, owner of 5 patents in sustainable materials, frequent guest at private summits in Davos, estimated net worth, for dollars, $8 billion, and she had just disappeared from the world. Some said she'd had a breakdown. Others whispered about fraud investigations or a nervous collapse after a hostile takeover attempt. The tabloids speculated she'd joined a spiritual cult in Bali. In truth, she'd simply walked away. One day she'd put down her phone, removed her shoes, and stepped out of her Manhattan penthouse without a word. She wanted to feel what it was like not to be Evelyn Hartwell. And now, here she was, 2 weeks later, hungry, barefoot, and eating a stale sandwich from a man who had nothing left to give. That night, Mark returned to the warehouse, curled up on his pallet, and fell asleep thinking about nothing in particular. Evelyn, meanwhile, found herself haunted by that sandwich. It wasn't the taste, God knows, it was terrible, but the gesture. It had been years since anyone had given her anything without expecting a return. Stockholders wanted dividends. Partners wanted equity. Employees wanted raises. Even charities wanted exposure. Mark wanted nothing, and that disturbed her. The next morning, she returned to the bench. He was there, sipping black coffee from a cracked styrofoam cup. "You again," he said. "I'm not crazy," she replied. "I never said you were. I have money." "I don't." She smiled. It was crooked and tired and not at all rehearsed. "What's your name?" she asked. "Mark." "Mark," she repeated. "Would you help me disappear?" He blinked. "Disappear? I want to start over. I want to be no one. Like you." He considered her carefully. He'd seen delusion before, worn it like a coat in every size and color. But this wasn't delusion. This was escape. Why would you want that? Because I forgot what being human feels like, she said, almost to herself. And you, she looked him in the eye, you reminded me. He didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. For the next several days, they met at the same bench. She listened to his stories, the factory, the layoffs, the slow erosion of everything. He listened to hers, the boardrooms, the pressure, the sense that every success came with a heavier price tag. He taught her how to stay warm with newspaper under your coat. She taught him how to read people by their shoes. They weren't friends exactly, more like fellow refugees. But everything changed the night he got sick. It started with a cough, then chills, then fever. The warehouse offered no protection from the October wind. He collapsed 2 blocks from the soup kitchen. Evelyn found him. She dragged him into the back of a taxi. She paid the driver $500 cash to ask no questions. At the clinic, she gave a fake name, Julia. No ID, no insurance, but she covered the bill up front. They gave him antibiotics and warm soup and kept him for 3 days. She sat by his bed the entire time. By the time he woke up fully lucid, the fever gone, she was holding his hand. You saved me, he whispered. No, she said. You saved me first. Mark awoke on the 4th day, feeling less like a ghost and more like a man. His throat still ached and his ribs felt as if they'd been kicked by fate itself, but the fever had broken. The sterile scent of the clinic clung to the sheets, and the light through the blinds told him it was morning again. Another one. Still here. She was reading when he stirred. Same bench posture, just now next to his hospital bed instead of in the park. The book looked expensive, leather-bound, no title on the cover. He'd later learned she never read the same book twice. Never needed to. You sleep with your mouth open, she said without looking up. You sit like you own the place, he croaked. She closed the book with a soft thud. Funny thing about ownership. Most people think it comes with a deed. It doesn't. It comes with indifference. She smiled faintly. You're awake. Good. You're still here, he said, not quite hiding his surprise. She tilted her head. You expected me to vanish again? I figured you were a hallucination. The redhead who feeds on stale bread and guilt. Evelyn shrugged. I've been called worse. She had. By shareholders. By journalists. By ex-fiancés with impeccable teeth and no imagination. The doctor entered, middle-aged, overworked, politely indifferent. Evelyn stood, shook his hand, and handled the small matter of payment like she was settling a lunch tab. Mark observed the ease with which she operated. There was a rhythm to her presence. She'd spent years learning to glide through rooms built to resist women like her. Now, those same rooms bent in her direction like sunflowers to light. When they left the clinic, she didn't offer him a ride. She didn't suggest a shelter or give him a prepaid card or arrange for transitional housing, that beloved euphemism of the guilty rich. She simply walked beside him, 2 shadows trailing along the sidewalk, indistinct from all the others. He led her to the warehouse. It wasn't much. A few cots, some crates for furniture, an oil drum that sometimes held fire. The others were gone that day, off chasing the next meal or the next mistake. She didn't flinch. You've seen worse? He asked. I've hosted worse, she replied. They sat on a crate. He offered her water from a bottle he'd filled earlier from a gym faucet. She declined. I have an offer, she said, without flourish. Everyone has an offer. Yours comes with strings? Not strings. An invitation. He didn't respond, so she continued. Come with me. 1 month. No promises beyond that. Just a trial run. Room, board, clean clothes. No lectures. No press. You help me remember what life feels like at the bottom. I help you, not die alone in a warehouse. He raised an eyebrow. You make it sound like a reality show. Reality hasn't been real to me in a long time. And you think I can fix that? I think you're the only person I've met in years who did something for me without calculating the ROI. He considered this. What's the catch? He asked. There's always a catch, she admitted. You'll have to live with me. He laughed, actually laughed. It felt foreign in his lungs. I've lived with rats. You can't be worse than them. She didn't correct him. They left the warehouse that afternoon. She took him to an apartment, not a penthouse, but certainly not cheap. Tasteful furniture, bookshelves full of real books, a kitchen that looked like it had been used. She insisted on no staff. Said she was trying to remember how doors work. For the first time in years, Mark showered with hot water and dried himself with a towel that didn't smell like mildew. He trimmed his beard, put on clean clothes, and sat awkwardly on a couch worth more than he'd earned in the past year. Evelyn brought coffee. Real coffee. With cinnamon. "You okay?" she asked. He nodded. "Just waiting for the punchline. It's not coming. That's what worries me." Over the next few weeks, something unexplainable happened. Not a miracle, nothing so dramatic. But a shift. She cooked. Badly, but with effort. He taught her how to make grilled cheese without burning the pan. She showed him how to apply for things online without looking like a spam bot. He helped her carry groceries. She helped him navigate social services with the grace of someone used to bribing ministers. At night, they'd talk. About nothing, mostly. Memories. Mistakes. He confessed to stealing copper wiring once. She confessed to manipulating stock prices with a phone call. One of them cried during these talks, but it was never clear who started it. Then came the fundraiser. Evelyn had been invited months ago. One of those galas where everyone smells like expensive compromise. She didn't want to go, but she did. She brought Mark. He wore a suit she found in a boutique that catered to men with too much neck and not enough trust fund. He looked real, not polished, just real. They entered together. Silence followed. Everyone knew who she was. No one knew who he was. The whispers came fast. Rehab friend? Bodyguard? Rebound project? She didn't answer any of them. At dinner, someone finally asked. A man with a face like an open checkbook leaned over. "So, Evelyn, who's your guest?" She didn't miss a beat. "This is Mark," she said. "He once gave me a sandwich when I was starving. I thought I'd return the favor." Mark nearly choked on his water. The man blinked, laughed uncertainly, then moved on. Later, Evelyn turned to Mark. "That's what they call a power move," she said. He replied, "That's what I call career suicide." "Same thing," she said, "depending on the career." They left early. That night, on the balcony, under a sky too cloudy to be romantic, she kissed him. It wasn't practiced. It wasn't pretty, but it was true. He looked at her afterward, forehead resting against hers. "This wasn't part of the offer," he whispered. "I upgraded the terms," she replied. And for the first time in a long time, neither of them wanted to run. 3 months passed. Mark no longer slept with one eye open. The walls around him weren't rusted metal or cracked plaster, but actual drywall. Painted, repaired, even decorated in places by accident rather than design. He had his own key, a drawer for socks, and a toothbrush that didn't double as a crowbar handle. These were not extravagant things. But for a man who used to count coins to buy bread, they felt strangely luxurious. He still didn't know what to make of her. Evelyn Hartwell, once the untouchable force behind billion-dollar mergers, now a woman who burned toast, overwatered succulents, and occasionally forgot which remote controlled the lights. She made mistakes. She apologized for them. She had nights when she stared at nothing and days when she laughed at everything. He had seen her bark orders to a former senator over the phone and then sit on the kitchen floor an hour later, weeping over a broken mug. "You okay?" he asked on one such evening, watching her wipe tears with the sleeve of his hoodie. "It was my father's," she said. "The mug, not the senator. Though, sometimes I confuse the two." He didn't pry. That was the deal. She told stories when she wanted to. And when she didn't, he poured her tea and changed the subject to something stupid. Like raccoons. Mark began working again. Not in a factory. Those days were over. But Evelyn had insisted on nothing patronizing. No fake positions. No charity posts. So he found something real, a maintenance job at a downtown library. It paid little, demanded much, and didn't ask him to explain the gap in his resume. "I fix things," he told the manager. "That's what I do." He swept floors, changed filters, repaired leaky pipes. Sometimes he shelved books. It was the first job he'd had in years that allowed him to breathe. Meanwhile, Evelyn was returning. Not to her old life, exactly, but to some version of herself that had existed before the boardrooms and the headlines. She began consulting again, on her terms. No press, no public appearances. She met people in cafes instead of corner offices. Said no more often than yes. They had rules. No talking about money after dinner. No laptops in bed. And no pretending either of them had everything figured out. It worked. Then came the proposal. Not his. Not hers either. It was from a magazine. A glossy, high-end one that made art out of wealth. They'd found out about Evelyn's disappearance and wanted the exclusive. There was, apparently, a bidding war. Her lawyer called it a media event. Evelyn called it a trap with catering. Mark asked, what would they pay? 7 figures, she said. For our story. They want the whole thing. The sandwich, the rescue, the kiss. They even suggested a photo shoot. Something tasteful. Bare feet optional. He stared at her. And I turned it down. He blinked. Why? Because I'm not interested in being a symbol. I was barely interested in being a person. She paused. And because I don't want the first real thing in my life to become content. Mark had no response to that. He just leaned in and kissed her forehead. But the world has a way of leaking in, even when the doors are locked. A week later, Evelyn's face appeared on a gossip blog, then a financial newsletter. Then, inexplicably, a celebrity meme page. Someone had snapped a photo of her and Mark walking near the river. The caption read, "Billionaire and flannel love affair with unknown drifter. Real or rehab romance?" She laughed when she saw it. He didn't. You okay? She asked, studying his face. Yeah, he said. Just remembering that I don't belong in your world. That's funny, she replied. I was thinking the same thing about myself. Still, the whispers grew. Journalists called. Emails poured in. People she hadn't spoken to in years suddenly remembered her number. One night, over wine and under a shared blanket, she turned to him. Let's leave. He blinked. Leave where? Here. The city. The noise. The constant watching. Let's go somewhere no one cares who either of us used to be. Like Canada? Like Vermont, she said. Mountains. Trees. Bad Wi-Fi. You serious? I have a house there. Empty. No staff. No press. Just deer and bad plumbing. He hesitated. Then, okay. They packed that weekend. 2 suitcases, a guitar Mark had found in a pawn shop, and a dog they adopted on the way. Some mutt with a limp and one I named Lester. The house in Vermont was less a mansion than an eccentric architect's mistake. Slanted walls, bookshelves where stairs should be, windows that overlooked nothing but fog. Evelyn loved it. Mark pretended not to. Their life there was quiet. She wrote. He built things, birdhouses, mostly, then a greenhouse. They hosted no one. They answered no emails. Evelyn paid the bills with silence. Mark paid with sweat. One night, she looked at him over the dinner table. No candlelight. Just cheap bulbs and the sound of Lester snoring. Marry me, she said. He looked up from his stew. Really? I've done everything backwards, she said. Might as well continue the trend. He didn't laugh. He didn't blink. He said, yes. The wedding was held in the backyard. No guests, no orchestra, no dress code. She wore boots. He wore suspenders. Lester served as best man. She kissed him under a tree she planted as a child and never saw bloom until that spring. Afterward, they sat on the porch, sipping coffee that had gone cold hours earlier. You ever think about how weird this is? He asked. Every day. And you're okay with that? Are you? He looked at her. The woman who once built empires out of molecules and now tried to bake scones using salt instead of sugar. Yeah, he said. I really am. The papers eventually lost interest. A newer scandal. A shinier divorce. Evelyn Hartwell faded from public obsession. Mark was never added to it. But in a forgotten corner of Vermont, in a crooked house full of light and dog hair, they lived quietly, deliberately, and without apology. Not because they had to, but because, at last, they wanted to. The winters in Vermont arrived not with ceremony, but with indifference, like a creditor at the door, neither polite nor apologetic. Snow fell early that year, long before Thanksgiving, turning the crooked house and its crooked owners into a snow globe for which no one had ever paid. Mark took to chopping wood in the mornings, partly for heat, partly for pride. There was something ancient and satisfying in splitting logs by hand. Evelyn took to painting, badly, gloriously. Her canvases were wild with color, indifferent to realism, frequently upside down. You've captured a tree that never existed, Mark remarked once, eyeing a particularly blue pine. Good, she said. That's exactly the kind I wanted. Their days settled into a rhythm. Breakfast together, sometimes burnt. Long walks with Lester, whose limp never improved but whose confidence soared. Afternoons were for whatever suited them. Sometimes she wrote, sometimes he fixed things. Occasionally, they did nothing. It was that sort of wealth, the kind no bank account measures. But peace, like firewood, requires tending. In early January, Evelyn received a letter. Not an email, not a phone call, A letter, handwritten, on thick paper, postmarked Zurich. She stared at it for an hour before opening it. Mark watched her from across the room. That's either a threat or an inheritance, he said. Worse, she muttered. It's an invitation. To be precise, it was from the board of Hartwell Ventures. Technically, Evelyn still owned 49% of the company. She'd never sold it, just stopped participating. The board, seeing an opening, had carried on without her. And now, they wanted to meet. Why now? Mark asked. They're launching something new, she said. Some climate tech division they're calling the Hartwell Initiative. They want my blessing. Publicly. Press photos. Headlines. The prodigal founder returns. And if you say no, they'll launch it anyway, just without the name. So, she looked at him. It's not just a name. It's my name. And they're planning to use it on something I don't even understand. Mark said nothing. This was territory beyond his pay grade. Beyond hers, too, if she was honest. She left for Zurich 2 days later. Alone. I need to face this myself, she said. He didn't argue. He packed her a sandwich. Evelyn returned a week later, silent and sunburned from a city that rarely saw sun. She looked thinner, harder around the edges. They offered me a buyout, she said over dinner. Mark raised an eyebrow. Of your own company? She nodded. It was generous. Enough to vanish for good. And I turned it down. He waited. I told them I'd let them use the name, if I get to run the division. He nearly dropped his fork. You're going back? Not to the company. Just this part. Just this project. It's about real things. Energy. Access. Waste reduction. No IPOs. No boardroom gladiators. Just impact. And the board agreed? They didn't have a choice. I reminded them who built their playground. He looked at her, the firelight casting shadows over the lines in her face. Not lines of age, lines of return. Of coming back to life. So, he said, we're leaving Vermont. No, she smiled. We're splitting time. 3 months there. 9 here. I already found us a place in the city. It has terrible insulation and a rooftop view of a billboard that says, invest in yourself. I thought you'd find it hilarious. He did. Spring came awkwardly to Vermont, as it always did, half mud, half miracle. By June, they had packed their lives into a borrowed truck and driven back to a city that neither missed them nor knew they were gone. Their new apartment was modest by Evelyn's standards. To Mark, it felt like a 5-star hotel run by anarchists. The neighborhood was loud, diverse, unpolished, perfect. She dove into work. The Hartwell Initiative opened quietly, without a press conference. She hired young scientists, unpolished engineers, climate economists with messy hair and burning eyes. She refused every investor meeting. She told her team, this isn't a unicorn. It's a hammer. We're not building exits. We're building doors. Mark, meanwhile, enrolled in night school. Architecture. Of all things. I used to fix what other people built, he explained. Now I want to build things no one else needs to fix. He was older than every other student by a decade, poorer than most by a lifetime. But he didn't care. He carried a satchel full of graph paper and walked to class with the quiet pride of someone who'd stopped waiting for permission. Life wasn't easier. It was just clearer. Then Evelyn got pregnant. Neither of them expected it. She was 44. He was 47. The doctor looked mildly surprised, then professionally encouraging. They stared at the ultrasound like it was an alien transmission. Well, Evelyn said, at least we're not bored. Mark laughed. You think Lester will approve? They told no one for 3 months. Not out of fear. Just privacy. Sacred, delicious privacy. When they finally announced it, at a team meeting, no less. The reactions ranged from tears to awkward applause. One junior engineer brought cupcakes. Evelyn ate 4. Pregnancy did not slow her down. If anything, she became more ferocious. She worked shorter hours, yes, but sharper ones. She spoke less, listened more. She left meetings with decisions already made. She operated like someone with limited time and infinite purpose. Mark, meanwhile, became an expert in baby strollers, swaddling techniques, the physics of breast pumps. He read parenting books until he began editing them in the margins. They named her June. Born on a Tuesday, in a storm, just past midnight. She came out with a full head of dark hair and lungs that didn't care about the hour. Evelyn held her first, then Mark, then both, together, in silence, while the nurses cleaned the room and the rain tapped against the windows like a polite reminder. No one photographed the moment. No one posted it. It belonged only to them. Back at home, Lester sniffed the baby like she was a suspicious pastry. He eventually accepted her as a tiny, screaming roommate. Evelyn said it was the best case of corporate merger she'd ever seen. They didn't hire a nanny. They took turns. Sleep became a myth. Meals became inventions. They lived in pajamas. They whispered at dawn. They laughed too loud at 3 a.m. It was chaos. It was perfect. Mark built June a crib by hand. No nails. Only joints and wood and time. Evelyn cried when she saw it. They hung no mobiles. No pastel slogans. Just a single framed photograph. The park bench. Empty. Snow-covered. Waiting. Evelyn called it their origin myth. One night, holding June as she slept, Mark whispered, "I still don't understand how this happened." Evelyn looked at him, eyes full of midnight. "You gave me a sandwich," she said. "I gave you my life." Seemed fair. Years, when they're good, tend to slide by like rivers, not dramatic, not always visible, but steady, carving. And by the time June turned 10, Evelyn and Mark had learned to live within the slow current of a life they never expected. Their apartment in the city, technically a repurposed carriage house, was full of uneven floors, crooked windows, and the distinct smell of books that had been kept and reread. Evelyn once joked that the place looked like it had been designed by a romantic anarchist. Mark responded by fixing a broken beam with precision, then lighting candles anyway. They were not poor, nor were they extravagant. Their wealth, such as it was, lived in time. Time to cook together, to read aloud, to sit in silence while the tea steeped. They shared everything, duties, worries, remote controls. But they also preserved their separate corners. Evelyn still kept the study off limits. Mark had his basement workshop, where wood and paper were allowed to speak without interruption. June, precocious and sharp-eyed, absorbed it all. She was the kind of child who didn't ask what people did for a living. She asked what they built with their days. And she didn't like easy answers. At 11, she declared she would not be going to a private school. "You want to be homeschooled?" Evelyn asked. "No," June said. "I want to be around everyone." "You mean public school?" "Yes, that's where the stories are." Evelyn looked at Mark. Mark looked at June. And then they nodded, because how could they say no to that? They didn't raise her to be fearless. They raised her to respect fear and not let it vote. Meanwhile, Evelyn's condition progressed slowly. Parkinson's isn't kind, but it can be patient. Some days were good. Some were infuriating. On the worst ones, she lost her ability to write. On the best, she sat in the sun and told June stories from her time at the top. Most of them irreverent, none of them flattering. June once asked, "What's the secret to becoming a billionaire?" Evelyn, tired, answered without irony, "You have to be both ruthless and lucky, and then survive yourself." Mark continued his architecture work, designing shelters and community spaces, places built for permanence without pretense. His drawings were clean, but his philosophy wasn't. He believed buildings should feel like they're listening. He taught evening classes part-time. His students, mostly younger, called him Mr. Sandwich after hearing the legend. He never corrected them. He never really explained it, either. Some things were better left unpolished. By the time June turned 16, she'd begun to build something of her own, a digital archive of forgotten generosity. She called it Unrecorded. People sent in anonymous stories of small acts, fleeting kindnesses, things no one had filmed or posted. She published them without names, without dates, without clout, just pages of people being decent when no one was watching. It caught on. One morning, Evelyn read 3 stories from the site, paused, and said, "This is the most useful thing we've ever done." Mark smiled. "It's not even monetized." "Exactly," she said. The world beyond their home churned as it always had. Markets rose and fell. Protests ignited and faded. Governments changed hands like inherited furniture. But within their small orbit, the rhythm held. Until it didn't. Evelyn collapsed on a Tuesday. No warning. No speech. Just her body, betraying her at last. The ambulance came fast. The hospital was clean. The prognosis was clinical. "It's time," the doctor said, not cruelly. They brought her home. Mark didn't leave her side. June slept in a chair nearby, refusing offers from friends to stay elsewhere. For a week, the house became very quiet. No music. Just whispers. And machines. On the final night, Evelyn asked for two things. Play me that jazz record, she said. The one we bought after our first fight. Mark found it. Dusty, slightly warped. Perfect. And the second? He asked. She pointed weakly to a drawer. Inside, a faded paper bag, inside of which was a single peanut butter sandwich. Made it weeks ago. Froze it. Mark raised an eyebrow. Planning ahead? Legacy, she rasped. Always, sandwich-shaped. She took one bite. Smiled. Then closed her eyes. When she died, it was the middle of the night. The snow had just begun to fall. Lester, now old and half-deaf, lay by the bed. Mark held her hand until the sun rose. The funeral was private, as she'd requested. No press. No eulogies from people who once ignored her emails. Just Mark, June, a few friends, and a small choir singing a song no one knew the name of. Later that day, Mark found a sealed letter on her desk addressed to him. It read, "You always asked how I built so much. I never did. I just paid attention. You paid attention to me. So we built together. Don't preserve me. Don't quote me. Just keep building places where lost people can find a chair, a fire, and maybe something to eat. And when in doubt, make sandwiches." She'd signed it in her usual way. Mark didn't remarry. He didn't retire either. He kept teaching, kept designing. He helped June grow unrecorded into a global archive, translated into 42 languages. It became a quiet phenomenon, proof that kindness, though inefficient, was still undefeated. When June graduated from architecture school, her final thesis was titled Shelters, Benches, and Other Forms of Love. Mark attended the ceremony in the same suit he wore to his own graduation. A little tighter now, a little looser in spirit. He spent his later years in a modest house with wide doors and deep chairs. He often left sandwiches wrapped in wax paper on park benches. Sometimes they were eaten, sometimes they were ignored. It didn't matter. He'd already learned that generosity was never about return. One spring morning, June returned to the bench. The same one. The original one. She sat for hours. When she stood to leave, she placed a sandwich on the seat. A stranger passed by, looked at her, then at the sandwich. "What's that for?" he asked. "For someone who's hungry," she said. He paused. "Is this some kind of social experiment?" She smiled. "No, just a theory." And then she walked away.